The drums were silent, but the whispers of the villagers were louder than ever. Amina was missing. The night was heavy, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Shadows danced under the pale glow of the moon, casting an eerie silence over the usually lively town of Kumasi. It all started in the lively town of Kumasi, where the market was always full of chatter, and the smell of roasted plantains filled the air. Prince Kwame, the shy son of the Ashanti King, spent most of his days wandering quietly through the palace gardens, avoiding the gaze of anyone who might want to talk to him. But there was one person Kwame could never ignore. Princess Amina, the daughter of a visiting chief from the north, had caught his eye the moment she stepped into the palace courtyard. Her laugh, soft yet full of joy, echoed in his mind every night. Kwame felt his chest tighten every time he saw her. He imagined walking up to her, imagined the words forming on his lips, but his feet stayed rooted in place. His hands fidgeted nervously whenever she was near, and his mind raced with thoughts of her laughter and the way her smile seemed to light up the courtyard. He longed to tell her how much she brightened his world, but fear held him back, a weight he couldn't shake. But his words always stayed locked in his throat. What if she thought he was foolish? What if she laughed at him? So Kwame watched from afar, never saying a word. One evening, the palace was thrown into chaos. Amina, who was supposed to join the evening feast, was nowhere to be found. Her maid swore she had seen her near the market earlier, but no one had seen her since. The king called for his guards to search, but hours passed, and there was no sign of her. Kwame's heart pounded. Amina was missing, and no one knew where she was. Quietly, Kwame slipped out of the palace. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something in his heart told him he had to find her. The moon was bright, lighting the dirt paths as Kwame walked through the quiet streets of Kumasi. The market, usually bustling, was empty now. Stalls stood abandoned, and the faint sound of crickets filled the air. As he turned a corner, he heard a muffled cry. His heart raced as he crept closer to the sound, his sandals barely making a noise on the ground. Behind an old storage hut, he saw her. Amina. She was tied up, her face streaked with tears, her hair disheveled, and her dress torn at the edges. Her eyes were wide with fear, darting between the three men who stood around her. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, leaned in close, speaking in a low, threatening tone. Another fiddled with a knife, the blade glinting under the moonlight, while the third kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to come. Kwame's breath itched as he took in the scene, his heart pounding louder than ever. Three men stood around her, whispering to each other. Kwame froze. What could he do? He was no warrior. He had no weapon. But then he saw something, a heavy wooden stick leaning against the hut. His hands trembled as he picked it up, his breath shaky. Without thinking, Kwame stepped forward. The stick felt awkward in his grip, but he swung it with all his might, striking one of the men across the back. The man let out a yell, stumbling forward. The other two turned, but Kwame didn't stop. He swung again and again, shouting at the top of his lungs. The noise woke nearby villagers, who rushed out of their homes with lanterns and tools. The kidnappers, realizing they were outnumbered, fled into the night. Amina looked up at Kwame, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. You saved me," she whispered. Kwame dropped the stick, his hand still shaking. "I couldn't let anything happen to you," he said softly. From that night on, Kwame wasn't so shy anymore. The story of how he saved Amina spread through the palace, and people began to see him in a new light. The guards nodded with respect when he passed, and even the king praised his bravery at the next feast. Amina and Kwame became close friends, often walking together in the gardens and sharing stories about their dreams. Soon, the whispers in the palace weren't about missing princesses, but about a prince and a princess who couldn't stop smiling at each other.